Thank you. Can y'all hear me okay? Sound is good? Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come back and speak in South Dakota. This will be my, I think, third trip up here over the last several years of making this presentation, and your state just gets more and more beautiful. Your people are so nice, and you really have no idea how fortunate you are to have the administration that you do and the backing that you do. So coming from someone from southern New Mexico in a very progressive state, it's a treat to come up here. So a little bit about myself. I was raised on a cow-calf ranch in southern New Mexico, went away to college, came home. My husband and I moved back there about 14 years ago. We raised our daughter on the ranch and just recently purchased it from my mom, so we're now officially there forever, jokingly. I got into this because, as my husband says, I couldn't keep my mouth shut on Facebook. And basically what I did was I had made a post, and I'll get into it in a bit, but it was a situation that kind of got my blood boiling, and I probably shouldn't have ranted and raved on Facebook, but I did. And New Mexico Farm and Livestock Bureau kind of picked that post up. They came out and did some interviews. We ended up taking several media crews to the border, and it just kind of turned into this. I had a friend, a coworker actually, that had asked me to come and speak at the South Dakota Women in Ag Conference probably 5 or maybe 6 years ago. And so that was my very first trip up here. I'd never done it before, and now here I am 6 years later. I'm back up for the third or fourth time, I think, to South Dakota. So thank you for that. A little bit about our country. We've got a lot of low, what we call Tobosa draws. They're about 4,500 feet elevation, and we go up to about 6,000 feet. The mountain country is pretty rocky, and it's rough country, and I kind of wanted to start off with this so you can understand when we look at the immigration side of things and the struggles that we face, there's two very different facets. There's the drug trafficking, which stays up high in the mountains. They don't want to be caught. They're harder to track up there, and so they like to stay up high. So the dangers of running into the drug traffickers is more likely up in the hills. The human trafficking is a different story. They stay down low. Typically, they're not fit enough to travel through the mountain country. They're usually running in groups of, we've seen everything from 5 to 50 or 60 at one time. And what they're really doing is trying to stay low so that they can get picked up by Border Patrol. Once they're picked up, they're processed, fingerprinted. If they don't have any kind of previous arrest record within the states, they're basically processed and turned loose. So they come up here looking to get caught by Border Patrol. This is my little family. I've joked, the picture on the left I've used for the last, 5 years, and I finally made them take a current picture with me this last spring. So the picture on the right is current. But our daughter is 18, and she grew up homeschooled. She worked alongside us all as long as she could ride, as early as she could ride. And if any of you have teenage girls, you understand with that always came a passel of teenage girls that came with her. So we were always working a crew of girls, which I love, and my husband and I love, and they're handy little turds, and they were fun to work with, and it was really fun to watch them grow up and learn to make hands. But from my standpoint, it was a little bit more weight on my shoulders as far as being responsible for someone else's kids out in the pasture, especially with the presence of illegals. I say it all the time, these girls were raised just like you raise your kids, teaching them not to walk behind a horse or to look out for rattlesnakes or whatever predators you have up here. These girls were raised to look for illegals and look for sign of illegals and presence of illegals out in the pasture. So this specific day, I had dropped Danley and her friend off. Danley was probably 12 and Allie was 10. And they were supposed to follow these cattle down the bottom of this canyon. It was about 1.5 miles to the bottom. And I remember when I dropped them off, I was like, stay off your phones. Don't be jacking around. Don't be playing around. You got to pay attention. Those canyons from the south, they were pretty heavily traveled with drug traffickers. And so I knew they were going to be riding right over the top of whatever trails were there. So I really was reiterating to them while we left. I said, you guys just got to pay attention. Don't be causing a scene. And so I followed my husband up over the ridge, and I snapped that picture before I left, and I was mad. Oh, I was mad that night. I about killed my horse that day because I kept topping out to make sure that they were okay, and I was genuinely worried about him. Well, it turned out that everything was fine. The drive came together. The girls were fine. They never really saw anybody, and it would turn out to be a productive day. Well, I was still kind of furious about it, so I put this picture on Facebook, and I was just basically saying, I can't believe I had to have this conversation with my daughter. I can't believe that this is our reality and nobody really knows what it's like. Where is our support? Yada, yada, yada. Well, that post kind of went viral. And New Mexico Farm and Livestock picked it up. They came out to the house, did a round of interviews. From that exposure, we ended up taking several film crews to the border. We ended up hosting a lot of different legislators and presidential candidates that wanted to see what the border reality was like. And then from there, I ended up coming up here, and the rest is history. Oh, I got to say one more thing. So there's two stories that I'm going to tell you about. Probably the most severe, most dangerous encounters. And it's not, I don't want you to think it's an everyday situation, but it could be. So the first one was 2010. A local rancher from the area, I grew up with his kids. We all went to school together. He was out checking waters. He radioed to the house and said that he had seen an illegal in distress and that he was going to go check it out. He never came back that night. They sent a search party out for him and found him shot in the back. His dog was killed. And it looked, when daylight came and they could see tracks, it looked like he had come upon this water and like sped away real fast and just didn't get far enough away. Some local cowboys and the sheriff's department ended up tracking one set of tracks back into Mexico. His killer was never found. There's never been any real peace or closure for his family because of that. And that situation really changed the dynamics on how anybody in that area approached illegals going forward. You know, before we had always kind of approached them with like he says in the video, a Christian mentality. You would give them water, you'd give them food, you'd give them a place to stay, you'd work them for a couple days, you'd give them a ride to the interstate, whatever they needed. They were always very, very humble, very gracious, very appreciative, and it was a good coexistence. After that, things changed drastically, and anybody that was local really didn't bother or risk giving them any kind of support. Then in 2015, a local well driller was drilling a well on a ranch that borders Mexico. He had gone down in a company pickup that morning, and he came upon a drive-through from the night before. Some illegals had come across the border and had buried their vehicle in some mud. And he stopped to help them, which is not very smart, but he did. And they ended up taking him hostage. They bound him, gagged him, threw him in their pickup, or in his pickup, loaded their drugs in his pickup, and drove 60 miles to their drop. When they dropped their drugs, they gave him his pickup back, took his wallet, and said, if you talk to the authorities, we will come kill your family. So obviously he didn't talk to the authorities. What is mind-blowing to me is that didn't even make local news. I'm sure y'all didn't hear about it up here, and it barely made local news in our area, much less state news. So following that incident, I worked with New Mexico cattle growers and Arizona cattle growers, and we ended up hosting basically a public meeting called Calling Washington Home. We invited legislators from both states, any media outlet we could get access to. And we had a panel of speakers that presented on the challenges of living on the border. Whether it was a rancher, we looked at it from a vet standpoint, an animal health standpoint. We had a realtor come in and talk about how the land values south of the interstate had drastically decreased because of illegal presence. We had school administrators come in and talk about the dangers of illegals coming through the school grounds during the day and what they were doing like on a regular basis to keep kids safe. It was a really informative meeting, and I think it was really well received by the public. It was so well received that we ended up hosting another one in a neighboring town shortly after. It still didn't make any national news. Nobody picked it up. And so that became, at that point, I really realized that it was going to take this, me talking to people and having those face-to-face conversations, for people to really understand what the realities of what it's like on the border is, and then you can make your own decision on how you vote. I'm not here to influence that, but I do think it's important that you understand what things are really like. So I'm going to show a video that we put together from both of those talks. It's brief, but I want to make sure you're hearing a standpoint from other people, not just me.
My cousin, my uncle, my father, and myself sat down for breakfast and talked about what we were going to do for the day. When we finished, my cousin and I went to move cows, while my father went to check a motor and my uncle went to check other waters on the ranch. That was the last time I saw my father. Rob Krentz was on his way to check the motors when he called his brother on a cell phone and said there was someone walking across the pasture and he was going to see what was going on. Friends and neighbors came to help us look for my father that afternoon when we couldn't get hold of him for hours. A neighbor called the sheriff's search and rescue team, and they started looking as well. The news came in late that night that they had found my father. Rob was a great and caring man, helpful to others and dedicated to the way of life that he loved. He worked to help others, volunteering his time to help the local school, his community, family, and friends. To understand where I'm coming from, you need to know the people that live in this area. Most of the people in this part of the world has had at least one incident that has involved problems with trespassers across the southern borders illegally. When I was younger, I would see people crossing the border and knew that they were running from problems worse than getting caught on the northern side. Knowing that the Arizona desert can be dangerous to cross, we would make sure that there would be Border Patrol on the way to help them. I can remember a time in 1999, I saw two different groups of people crossing the ranch that numbered larger than 100. We used to approach these people as Christians to make sure there was no injuries and to tell the Border Patrol that there would shortly be there to help them. We would always do this even after we have had our houses broken into, our vehicles stolen, trash left in the country, and water lines broken. There has been many times when we would go and check storage tanks that we had spent a week's worth of time to make full, be drained because illegals would break water lines or floats to get a drink of water, and draining thousands of gallons of water out on the land. And we would still try our best to get these people help. After losing my father, all of that changed. Now, we don't go near these people. Not knowing what the situation holds, we don't put ourselves in a situation where we can get ourselves into trouble. The people that we see now are not the large groups of hundreds or more, but a people fleeing, small groups with bundles on their backs. There's been pictures of these same groups packing armed weapons.
One of our employees was working on the Gray Ranch south of here and was kidnapped by illegals, and they were drug runners. And yes, it was a kidnapping because there are rumors out there. I think a lot of the agencies have tried to cover this up. This is probably the first exposure of it. Albuquerque Journal called and we interviewed on the phone. Monday, that was the first time it was ever put in print. It was unbelievable what the response we got back to it. But he was kidnapped, and there is a big problem. Our concerns from this kidnapping, which we have encountered, if the border is not secured and the flow of illegals which majority of the illegals coming through here now are carrying drugs. If this will continue, what will it do to this economy of this small community? And then it will have a domino effect for all of us. The financial burden we have endured since the kidnapping is alarming. From lost revenue in December and January due to not working in areas close to the border, until we could regroup and try to figure out how we were going to keep our employees safe. It's a tough issue here. OSHA says you've got to provide a safe working environment for your employees. How are we going to do it when they're out here in this drug-infested part of our country? Luckily, they did not kill him.
Around 2008, about 5 of those 8+ miles were replaced with the Normandy-style fencing to deter vehicle traffic. It did not work. Vehicles drive where the barrier ends to the barbed wire fence, cut it or untie it from the post and drive over it. Or they ramp over this vehicle barrier. If the vehicles are detected by Border Patrol, they try to get back to Mexico, but they do not care what or who is in their way. They will drive over the fence or they will drive over you. They do not care about the people they might run over or the people in their vehicles that they are smuggling. We have seen the ebb and flow of illegals crossing our ranch for decades. When there's talk of amnesty, we get a flood of people. When the Border Patrol concentrate on the trouble spots, the illegals find a new route. They never stop, they just change locations.
Well, behind me is where our property starts. We butt up against the Mexican border, and then we go about 3 miles north of here. Right now we're in an area where we've had a lot of drive-throughs, full-size pickups with marijuana. They cut the wall down, drive through. With the drugs coming right now, and the backpackers, the mules they call them, they're loaded with 50-pound pack in the back and a 20-pound pack in the front, double bundles.
So I'll give you one more story of a scary encounter that I went through personally, and then I'll get through some pictures and some actual footage of what the border looks like, so you don't have to just keep hearing these horror stories. It's a great after-dinner conversation, isn't it? This particular day, Bobby and I had gone into our mountain country to gather or look for stuff we had missed from the week before when we'd moved out of there. Shortly after I took this picture, I dropped down in this canyon, and he had gone around the other way. There's no service back in there. So I was riding up the canyon bottom, kind of looking up on the slopes to see if I could see anything that we had missed, and my horse stopped to pee, and I just kind of looked down the slope, and in front of me, probably from me to Clay, there was 4 drug runners. They were dressed in American military camo. They had black masks, black carpet shoes, big bundles, and every single one of them had an AR. And they were brushed up under a juniper tree. Well, I kind of jumped, and when I did, my horse jumped, and I grabbed for my pistol, and when I did, they all just kind of came up really aggressive-like, and I took my hand off my pistol, and I just kind of waved at them, and I had to ride right by him to get by him. So I rode past him, and I was just praying that I wasn't going to get shot in the back. I just kept thinking about Rob and everything that he had gone through and his family, and it was just a bad deal. So anyway, I picked up maybe 3 or 4 cows shortly after I'd left those guys, and I had to take them right back down that same canyon to some water. Well, by the time I had got my cows put together and down the canyon, they were gone. So I got my cows down into service. I finally met up with Bobby. We talked about everything, and I was really shook up, mainly because if Danley had been with us that day, she would have been the one to go up that canyon because it was the easiest to ride. And I thank God every single day that she was off running barrels and playing rodeo kid and not with us. But it was really scary. The next day, I had to go back into that same pasture by myself. And I had come in from a different end, and I was kind of coming around the back side of the canyon where I'd seen those guys the day before. Well, that steep peak right in front of Bobby, like in the far back of the picture. It's about 6,500 feet up at the top of that. I decided I was going to top up on that and see if I could see any cattle, because I knew we were probably pretty clean, but I wanted to make sure. Well, it took me a good couple hours to get to the top, and I ended up stopping about like 3/4 of the way up, let my horse breathe out. I got all the way to the top, and there was a very fresh spotters camp. And what spotters are, they're usually lone guys, or maybe 2 of them are with them, and they get up high and they do exactly what it sounds like. They're spotting for Border Patrol coming through, for local residents, and they're kind of guiding whoever's carrying the drugs down to where their rendezvous points are. So I knew that there was a spotter up there the day before, and he most likely had me in his sights. He had probably radioed to those guys and told them to brush up. And even now, like it was pretty scary for me. It was the first encounter with anybody heavily armed at that close of a distance, and it really shook me up. Things like that don't happen all the time, and I want you to understand that, but they can. So now we're going to get into some facts and kind of get off the scary story side of things. This is the Mexican border, and what Doris was trying to say earlier was Boot Heel. It's the Boot Heel of New Mexico. The red bar up at the top is where our ranch is, and that is just south of Interstate 10, which is the closest major highway that they can get to once they cross into the U.S. The little star on the bottom, kind of middle of the screen, is a starter yard that we used to precondition calves on. Traffic coming across, it was usually the first place they would hit when they got into the States. So we had a lot of destruction down there. Cake trucks stolen, they would ransack campers, they would sleep in the barns. It was just a nonstop, constant presence of them at that location. The New Mexico border is 181 miles. 103 of that is the border wall, which is in the red. There's parts of the old wall and parts of the new wall, and I'll show you the difference between the two in a bit. There's 56 miles of barbed wire. It's 6-strand barbed wire, and that's the pink dotted line that you see. Right where it corners and heads south is Monument 40, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. And then down there at the very bottom is Antelope Wells. It's a single-manned Border Patrol port that usually semis use more than anything for transporting stuff north and south. Very little tourist traffic goes through there. It's super remote. And then the orange line is Normandy and pedestrian fencing, and I'll show you pictures of that in a minute as well. So what I want you to note, and it's hard for me to point to on the screen, but straight south of the red line where the wall is, you see Highway 2. That is a large highway, majorly used highway in Mexico. So when you were seeing pictures of these large groups of asylum seekers making these 100-mile treks to the border, they were getting bused to Highway 2 and walking across from there. I want to make sure you understand that, because what you were seeing on the news is not accurate. So when they get to Highway 2, they either go straight, and you can see the first thing they're going to hit is our starter yard. All they have to do is crawl through the fence, because there's very little Border Patrol presence in that location. They either do that, or they rush the single Border Patrol at Antelope Wells. And, it's a no-brainer on who's going to win that one. There's little ports like Antelope Wells all along the border from McAllen to San Diego. And so when they were shifting the presence of these asylum seekers and the pressure on where they were going to go, they were targeting little tiny ports like this. This is Monument 40. I took this a long time ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago when I first started this, but it has not changed. There's still a 6-strand fence between us and Mexico. And the interesting thing that you might find interesting is that fence is the rancher's responsibility to maintain. So every time there's a drive-through, every time something's cut, it is their responsibility to fix it, and they cannot go into Mexico to get their cattle back. So it's usually something that they're replacing immediately. Here's more pictures of the different monuments. They have one monument every mile along the border. Some different types of the monuments. This is the port at Antelope Wells, as you can see It's very small. These pictures are what the Normandy fence looks like. So yes, it might stop a vehicle from driving through, but it's not going to stop anybody from crawling over. And what the vehicles typically do is drive to the end of it, like you see on that far picture on the right, and then just drive right over the fence, and they're in the States. This little town is called Las Chepas, the picture on the left. It is directly on the border in Mexico, and it is a 100% cartel town. Like, you don't live there if you're not in the cartel. The friends of ours that have the ranch on the American side have been dealing with drive-throughs and destruction from them for years. They're a fifth-generation family that has been ranching on the border for that long, and it's an ever-present problem. Since these pictures were taken, this has all been replaced with border wall, so that they do see some relief from the human trafficking side of things, but there's still a heavy presence of drug traffickers. So the picture on the right is where the Normandy, or where the pedestrian fencing ends. This was a drive-through that happened. As you can see, they're out there in the middle of the night. Border Patrol called them and said they had a drive-through, and they have to get up and go fix everything to keep their cattle from crossing into Mexico. More pictures of the border fence. It's not much. It will hold cattle, but it's not going to hold anybody else. And the picture on the right, on the far back against the bottom of those hills, is where Highway 2 is. So you can see it's fairly close to the fence. It's not much of a trek if you're trying to come up here to declare asylum. Here are what the border wall looks like. The picture on the left is the old wall. There's still parts of that are up. It's 18 feet tall. All the way to the top. I think it's like 14 feet of the fencing area. And then the picture on the right is the new wall. It's 30 feet tall, and it goes in the ground about 6 feet. The interesting thing about the wall, and this is what I say all the time, like, I've never been the one that's sitting there yelling, build the wall. I'm fully in support of it, but it's not a fail-safe, or it's not a cure-all to the problem. They're going to find a way under it, over it, and through it. We're talking about trying to stop a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's not going to happen by building a wall. I'll show you some more pictures of the wall itself. So the new wall, you can see, there's some pictures here of it. On the picture on the right, up on the top of the slopes, you can see the scar left on the land from where they had to really do a bunch of constructive work to actually put the wall into the side of the mountain. And it's like that all over. There's also these gaps randomly up and down the wall the whole way. And I feel like they were probably put in places of low drainage, and they were probably going to come back and put the floodgates in. But when President Biden shut the construction down, they never got finished. So now it just works like a gate, like anybody can come in whenever they want. Here's pictures of the floodgates. The interesting thing about these is Border Patrol has to open these at the beginning of the monsoon season and leave them open for the duration of the monsoon season. So once again, it's working like a gate. And then you can see in the picture on the right, they get so full of debris and erosion that they're very hard to close at the end of the season. When President Biden shut the wall construction down, projects like this that weren't finished were just left unfinished. And there's projects like this along the entire border. The construction crews were ordered to pull off the border, and that's what they did. And they left all these projects just half finished. They also left piles and piles and piles of debris from the old fence and the old boundary or border that was there. We're talking like several football fields worth of material every so often down the entire length of the border. And they're still there. They also had these large areas where they kind of made deals with the rancher or the landowner to clear a spot so it was kind of like a staging scene or staging location for their construction crews. There's so much new material just laying out in the sun and the weather rotting, and it did for a couple years, and then finally I heard that they were starting to auction some of it off online, and so a lot of the new material has been picked up, but the old material is still there. Also, the picture on the right, you'll see where the Normandy barrier ends. that was the section that they were in the middle of putting the wall up on. So when the construction stopped, they just left these giant holes, and the ranchers had to go in and string wire and put fence up to keep their cattle in the states. Okay, so what are they bringing across? This was a really large bust. This was down in South Texas. You can see the bundles. They actually brought these across on mules, meaning not the mules like you're seeing in North Carolina right now, but human mules. And they were bringing them across on their backs, and they had a huge bust. This was an interesting story. This is down just south of us. This vehicle, the Border Patrol found it parked on the American side, had this camouflage tent over it. Whenever they came up on it and saw that there was somebody in it, the guy tried to get away back into Mexico, and he hit the Normandy fence and didn't make it very far, but that's what he had in it. And apparently he was just waiting for their pickup or to make their swap, but it didn't work. Here's a couple pictures of the mule trains, like what we call mule trains. You can see the bundles that they're carrying. The picture on the left was from a game cam in Douglas, Rodeo. This picture's a lot to look at, but the one thing I want you to note is the purple and the orange area. The purple area is the Valdez cartel, and the orange area is the Sinaloa cartel. Our ranch is directly north of that territory line. So whenever the two cartels start really fighting over territory, you see a lot more drug traffic come through, and it's typically traffic from both cartels, which is very dangerous to get caught in the crosshairs of that on the American side. The other thing is when they are fighting over territory in the border towns, it's a very gruesome, very, very bloody scene. Like we're talking naked bodies hanging from overpasses and mass shootings in broad daylight. And you probably never hear about any of it on the news, but it happens quite often. So this is when I talk about over, under, and through it. This is the new wall. What they did was they just came in, torched a piece of it, they slide it out of the way, slide their drugs through to their drop, slide it back into place, going about their business. There was no telling how long it was like that until the Border Patrol found it. But it's like there's places like this all up and down the border. Here's a couple pictures of drive-thrus gone wrong. The picture on the left was a drive-thru down in South Texas. The one on the right, this pickup was stolen from somebody, I think in Tucson, Arizona. And it was found a week later, used as a drive-thru into the States in Columbus, New Mexico. I have a friend that works with the Border Patrol. He and some buddies rode their bikes along the border wall from McAllen all the way to San Diego. And a lot of these pictures I got from him. And he said he found this, it looks like a highway practically, is in the middle of the pasture, far from any type of home dwelling or presence of any kind. He said you could tell where they would just unclip it from the H braces, lay it down, drive over it, pop it back up, and it's up. And I mean, by the looks of the tracks, they'd probably been doing it for quite a while. Another drive over gone wrong. This was in San Diego. It's my understanding that that's still there. I don't know. I don't know for sure because I haven't been to San Diego in a while. But I really do want to go see if it's still there. But they'll try anything to get through the wall. We have some tunnels. This tunneling system actually came up in Douglas, Arizona, which is where my husband works. It came up into an old abandoned warehouse, and you can see it's ventilated. They've got lift systems to pull the drugs up out of the tunnel into the warehouse floor. The picture on the left here is of that same tunneling system. The one on the right is from a tunnel that was found in Nogales, Arizona, and it actually came up in someone's house. I mean, you can see the amount of work that they put into building it. I always say, imagine how productive they could be if they put that to good use. Well, I've been told that from the Border Patrol that they're starting to fly fentanyl over the wall on drones because it's light, it's small, and a little bit goes a long way. So that is very scary for what could happen to our kids and anybody else that could get on that. They also have these catapult systems. The picture on the right, I actually took in Agua Prieta, Mexico, which borders Douglas, Arizona. And it's exactly how it works. They just put a bundle of drugs on it and fly it over the wall. And the catapult on the left was actually in southern Arizona as well. That's an older picture. It was found in 2011, but I'm sure they're still using similar contraptions today. There's also signs like this all up and down the border warning tourists or anybody driving through the area that's not from there to not pick up hitchhikers, basically. The picture on the right is what it looks like. It's a calling station. So when the illegals come in, if they're in distress or they want picked up by Border Patrol, they can just hit the little red button and Border Patrol's on their way. And now under this administration, I mean, they were put in under this administration, but they're used basically as a free ride to freedom. They get processed and given money and shipped to a sponsor and given a court date, and they're in our system instantly. Okay, I'm going to go through some pictures of some different traffic. You can kind of see the difference between the drug runners and the human traffickers. The guys on the left, or actually both of these pictures were all drug runners. When the Border Patrol picked them up, they'd already seized their drugs, but they were bringing them up to a vehicle of some kind. More drug runners. The picture on the right, you can see his carpet shoes on. And I'll get into more pictures of those in a bit. The picture on the left was a game cam. We really don't know what he was doing, but he doesn't look like he has drugs. I'm assuming he was just looking for work. The guys on the right, same thing. They were looking for work. You can tell they're not in camo. Typically, the guys that are in camo are the ones that are packing or not wanting to be caught. More game cam pictures. My friend took these pictures on her way to take the kids to the bus one day. It was about a mile from her house, and it was a pretty large bust. She just snapped them. I have a lot of friends that know I do this, and so I'm always getting random pictures of illegals coming across. They're like, you might be able to use this in your talk. These were all just guys looking for work. You can see they're not even handcuffed. The Border Patrol just kind of has them rounded up, and they're walking them out to vehicles. These guys are definitely drug runners. You can see the one on the left with the carpet shoes. The picture on the right was from a game cam in South Texas. And you can see the carpet shoes in those pictures. More pickups. The picture on the right was a friend of mine that was literally in her yard. Like she took it from her front door. So this is an interesting story. I had posted on Facebook a couple years ago that I was looking for pictures from reputable sites because I wanted to make sure that the stories that I was telling and the pictures I was showing were kind of depicting what it was like from San Diego to McAllen. I wanted to make sure everybody understood that it wasn't just happening in New Mexico. Well, this friend of mine, that I didn't even know he did this, but he was down on the border taking pictures of birds, and he came upon this group that was fixing to cross. So the picture on the left is while they're still in Mexico. The one on the right was after they had seen him after they had crossed and they were trying to hide. But you can see they have carpet shoes. They're all sitting on big bales of pot. Some of them are armed. These are pictures of them crossing. So he just kind of stood there at the border fence and took pictures of them coming across. I was like, wow, good timing for me. These pictures my husband took just about, I guess it was last fall, or maybe this winter sometime, like February maybe. He was in there riding some fence and found these guys. The one on the picture on the right with the full circle, that guy is down on his hands and knees. He was in really bad shape, like he needed medical attention. And the guy in the picture on the right was begging Bobby not to call Border Patrol. He kept telling him that they were just looking for work and that they even offered to work for us. But they were dressed in camo and they had binoculars, no guns that he could see, and he said that he just had a feeling they were probably spotters is what he thought. But the guy, he was begging him, please don't call Border Patrol. This picture was taken in Patagonia, Arizona. They had caught a pretty good bunch of them, and the helicopter was flying around to see if they'd missed any. And you can see it's pretty rocky, pretty steep country. So in June, my husband went to work for a pretty large ranch in Arizona, and he's over their entire southern division, which means there's 2 ranches and then a feed yard. And the feed yard feeds about 15,000 head, and it's right on the border. Like, you can see the border wall from his porch, which I feel super safe when I go see him. Picture on the right, he was at the processing pens, and the guys, you can barely see him behind that set of pens, but they were just walking through the wheat pasture on a leisurely stroll headed north. The picture on the right was he had come in after riding some wheat or doing something and found this guy taking a nap in the hay bales. This is a pretty common occurrence. When they're working, they're just always like, there must be a hole in the wall or something where they're getting through right there, because they are constantly coming through this wheat pasture. Look at this guy roll. He's like, peace out, I'm gone. So Bobby found him one day and was trying to get him stopped to call Border Patrol, and he just kind of left Bobby in the dirt. Same with this guy. He's just on a leisurely jogging expedition right through the middle of the yard. And what cracks me up is this. You can see as soon as he comes up, he puts his hood up, tries to cover his face. He has his phone. He doesn't want to be seen, but he's going to go right through the middle of the yard to head north. I edited out a lot of I had him turn the sound off, because you probably don't really want to hear what Bobby's telling them. So we're going to get into the asylum seekers a little bit so you can see the difference in the type of people. So we don't have a lot of asylum seekers come across us. Most of the asylum seekers were either hitting at Antelope Wells and getting picked up right away, or they were hitting like north or south of Tucson and getting picked up directly. This little girl, let me back up. I have a friend that trains cow horses in Scottsdale. And when the asylum seekers were hitting the ports really hard, and that's when the news was reporting about all these kids like wandering the desert and women left behind and all that kind of stuff. Well, it really kind of pulled at his heartstrings, and he put a couple guys together, and they would go down. And a lot of people were doing this, apparently. I didn't realize it. But they would go down to the border and basically assist the Border Patrol in putting these lost kids back together. And it really was happening. Like, this little girl, she was probably 14, they thought. He found her in the middle of the night, wandering out in the desert. The group that she had come across had left her, and so he got her kind of gathered up and called Border Patrol and got her to some safety. Look at her. She's 14 and out there completely by herself. More pictures of the asylum seekers. This is a very common scene. Mother, several kids. You can tell by the way they're dressed and how clean they are that they have not made a 100-mile trek. Like, they've barely crossed. They probably got hauled in right to the border and came across. More asylum seekers. And more. And more. Grant, my friend on the left, he's the one that found this bunch wandering in the desert and got them up to Border Patrol. The stretch of road that runs along the wall is called the Roosevelt Easement. It's 60 feet, and it's supposed to be fully maintained year-round and accessible year-round to Border Patrol and anybody else that's going to be protecting the United States. So that's why you see this really nice road in most of the pictures. So this is a pretty accurate depiction of what it looks like when we say we jump somebody out in the pasture. They, like this bunch, he said he saw them walking. When they realized that there were riders out there, they kind of brushed up. And so he rides up to them, says a few things. I think a couple of them even asked for work. They were strictly looking for work, and he sent them on their way. So we'll watch this real quick. And this is a pretty good bunch. I mean, this is about average for what we see. It's rare that you just see one or two. Usually they come in bunches of 8 or 10, sometimes more than that. And there they go. And you can see in the background the rest of the riders. The cattle are coming together a little bit, and they're just going to head on north. So that's a very, very accurate depiction of what it looks like in our country, the one with all the flats and the peaks and all that. Okay, so now we'll get into some of the trash and the things that they leave behind, some of the damage and that kind of thing. So you heard me say carpet shoes several times. There's lots of different options to that. But what they do is when they make their drop, or not their drop, when they meet their pickup, they will completely disrobe and just like leave backpacks and camo jackets and carpet shoes and water bottles and blankets and whatever else they came across with right where their drop was, because they're going to change and look very inconspicuous after that if they were to get stopped. This was right on the side of the road by our house. Several carpet shoes, several bottles. The picture on the left, I always say this takes some creativity. Like, you got to give them that. They were trying to, be stealthy. The picture on the right is just an electrolyte bottle that's in Spanish. More trash. So much camo. So many backpacks. In areas where there's a lot of traffic and they come through a lot, we'll go through pretty often and pick everything up. Other times it's just kind of left there until we have time when we have time, to go around and pick everything up. The picture on the left my husband took at Douglas, and the picture on the right I took at the ranch. So the guys in the video that you just saw, they were heading to this highway. It's a very popular pickup spot. The folks that have the ranch that highway runs through, they do this monthly. Every month, they spend an entire day gathering up backpacks, hauling them off, and burning them. This was 1 month worth of traffic that was through their property that made pickups on that highway. The picture on the left is from a very heavily traveled trafficking trail in Tombstone, Arizona. And the picture on the right my husband took one day. He just found a blanket stashed. They're always stashing stuff, like the pictures, both of these pictures my husband took: water bottles, carpet shoes, blankets, you name it. I always say, like, are they coming back for it? Probably not. So this video, my husband took this. It's up on the top, I bet probably 5,500 feet, maybe 6,000 feet. It is steep and rocky. And he had topped up on this hill to push some cattle off, and he found all of this trash. And, like, look, there's flip-flops. I don't know. It looks like they use it pretty often for a spotter's camp. I'm going to show it one more time so you can look at it. He said it looked like it was probably used as a spotter's camp, but you can see all the backpacks and blankets. There's the little propane fire, or torches, excuse me. Food cans. I still can't get over the flip-flops. I don't know who would wear them up there, but... Okay, so this is kind of scary. My friend that lives near Hachita, New Mexico, the same one that took the picture of those guys when she was taking her kids to school, she walked out of her house one day and found this in her yard. Like, you can see the wood up at the top is her step to her house. So she just figured that it was somebody that had come through and had met their pickup the night before, which she was surprised she didn't hear it, but whatever. So she takes a picture of it for me, hustles out to the car, gets her kids in, is driving them up to the bus stop, and she sees this meter pole with this, it's like a jacket or a vest or something, and a knife stuck in it. So she stops, because she's wondering what it is. She takes a picture of it, and she's there like a very short amount of time, and all of a sudden she just gets rushed. I mean, guys come up from everywhere and are just rushing at her vehicle. So we all think that that was probably to mark a pickup, and they thought that she was their pickup man. But she obviously didn't stick around and find out. She headed north, dropped her kids off at the bus stop, waited for them to get on the bus, came back, and by the time she got back, the knife, the whatever jacket or whatever's stuck in, and all these clothes are gone. So that was kind of scary, because they were all right around her house and she didn't even know it. And she has dogs, so it's kind of a mystery. Now we're going to get into the destruction side of things. This is the part that'll probably make you sympathize and like super angry about. This was a 10,000 gallon storage. They broke the valve on it to get to water, filled their jugs up, and the rest of it drained all night. So you can see the carpet shoes in the picture on the left. We had to go through, find a valve, fix the valve, and it took us about a week to get water caught back up. This was in the middle of summer, and it was a very bad time to be out of water. Okay, so the next two pictures are pretty gruesome, and I apologize. If you have a weak stomach, you might not want to listen to it. This was they think around 16-year-old girl. My husband found her floating in this stock tank when they went out, or he didn't find her, the feed truck driver found her floating in the stock tank. They called Border Patrol, pulled her out, and her face had been bashed in. They don't know, there's tons of speculation. They don't know if she was intentionally, somebody hit her in the face with a rock or something and threw her in there, or if she was running, stumbled, crashed her, busted her face open and then fell in the water. But regardless, she passed away. The very next day, the sign on the right, or the picture on the right, that cross showed up right outside the fence, and it means no identification or unknown. It was pretty hard for everybody at the yard, because of the location, everybody that works for my husband is Mexican. And when I say that, I mean they cross every single day and come to work for him. So, he's the only white guy there. And it was really hard for all of his employees to see that, because that's a pretty harsh reality to what people are willing to go through to come here. The next picture is pretty gruesome, and for you ladies, I apologize in advance. It's a very hard thing to picture, but typically when the young girls are fixing to come across, I've heard that they start on birth control, because it's very likely that they're going to be raped along the way by the coyotes that are bringing them up. And the coyotes will do this. They rape them, hang their underwear or bras on these trees. They're called rape trees, and they are basically like a bragging right and a territory marker for the different cartels. And it is gruesome. I've never personally seen one of these in real life, and I pray to God I never do. It's more common in South Texas, but I can't imagine what life is like for them to be willing to put themselves through that to come here. And that's why I always say, especially on the human trafficking side of things, we have got to look at it from a humanitarian standpoint. You can't treat them the same as the drug runners. You just can't. It's apples and oranges. So I'm going to end on this. You can see the Boot Hill, very southwest corner of the state. I don't have my little marker, so I'm just going to kind of wing it. But if they can get to Lordsburg, which is north of that little red box that you can see, some of you might be able to see it, they can take just a state highway north through the Gila Wilderness and hit I-25 at Socorro and miss every single Border Patrol checkpoint, north, south, east, and west. Meaning they're in Albuquerque within 5 hours, they're in Denver in another 6 hours, they're in Oklahoma City in 7, they're in Las Vegas in 8. Within the day or two, they're in your backyards and your communities. And that's why I say all the time, yes, we deal with the damage and the destruction and the trash and everything that comes with the traffickers that are coming through us, but they're not staying where we're at. They're coming to your communities and your schools, and they're bringing the drugs with them, and that's why this is a topic that everybody needs to be concerned about, not just border residents. And the only reason I'm really up here is because of this. Our kids are the future for us, just like they're the future for your operations, and we're doing all we can to keep them safe and give them every possible opportunity to continue with what we're working so hard for. So that's why I'm here, and I really appreciate you letting me speak, and I'm sure you have questions. I don't think we're going to have an open Q&A, right? Okay. No, it's okay. I'll just come down, and if you have questions, come and find me. I think the band is ready to play, and we probably want to do something a little more fun than watch this, right? So with that, I just appreciate you. Thank you so very much.